everybody out there, how are you? This is the How to Thrive as an Indie Comic Creator Now panel. So if you're supposed to be in another panel, you better get going. But if not, you want to know the inside scoop on how to thrive in this ever-changing landscape. Well, let's do it. I'm going to let you know a little bit how this is going to go. Before I do, let me let you know, my name is Brian Pulido and I'm a veteran comic book creator. We'll get a little into my background so you could decide for yourself whether you should or shouldn't listen to what I have to say. But let me let you know how this panel is going to go. First up, I'm going to show you a little bit of my background. And then we're going to go over what I consider the 7 or 8 immutable laws of how to thrive as an independent comic book creator, right? That's what we're going to do. And at the end, we're going to do a Q&A. Now, I know you boys and girls aren't here live interacting. However, I've had this kind of panel before, and I'm going to do my best to guess what some of your questions would be, drop some knowledge on you. So without further ado, first up, again, let me let you know, my name is Brian Pulido. I'm a veteran comic book creator. My first comics were published in December 1991. And in about 1994, I decided I had it with being published by other people and decided to pick up the mantelpiece myself. So let me show you a little bit of the sort of comic books that I've done. So if you take a look on this wall here in the building we lovingly refer to as HQ, you'll see that I've either published or written a bunch of comic books. Let's see here. Evil Ernie is one. Certainly the character Lady Death I've been writing to this very day. I've written Chucky. I've published Insane Clown Posse, Megadeth. I've written Nightmare on Elm Street. I was the license holder for WWF at the time in the 90s. Again, Megadeth. Published Halloween. This is a real tip of the iceberg, folks. I completely lost count on how many I've worked on. Again, published Halloween, comic books for Static X, Lady Death. I created Purgatory and Rotor. I've done crazy cover enhancements, including Lady Death on leather. I wrote the Supernaturals for Marvel Comics with the characters Brother Voodoo, Satana, Ghost Rider, Werewolf by Night. A lot of fun. And let's see, any other ones? Yeah, again, more WWF stuff like China. I've been real lucky. If you take a look at this particular wall, you'll see, again, some of the stuff I've worked on. As an independent creator, I actually worked on other stuff. Very lucky that I was among the first people to get into the collector's market with action figures in the mid-90s with Mr. Clay Moore. So that's some of the background of what I've done. I'm actually I founded Chaos Comics in the 90s. I am the current founder and publisher of Coffin Comics, and we've been in the game, gosh, for 13 years, but in particular, the last 5.5 years, we've been rocking it with crowdfunding campaigns. Also, luckily, was involved with the Lady Death animated film, so it's a decent amount of stuff. Now, if that doesn't convince you to consider what I'm about to tell you, then also consider this. I have consulted with some of the top creators in the field on crowdfunding. I consult for them. I can say I also consult with some of the top comic book publishing companies also on the subject of crowdfunding. I actually am on people's speed dial. I get the call and they're like, I'm in a pinch, and I kind of help out. So that's my background as a creator. And how I've learned to thrive is by looking at a bunch of rules. So let's take a look at the first rule. Is there anything else I need to say about that? I don't know, Jimmy, for fun, you know what? Go all the way back and show people. Here's the other reason you should listen to me. That in my conference room of my comic book publishing company, I got a bar shaped like a coffin. So, look, your mileage may be different, but that's the main reason. I got a bar shaped like a coffin. Sorry, I digress. All right, so let's get into it. What are some of the rules to thrive as an independent comic creator? The first one I would say is educate yourself. And that seems obvious, but it really isn't. So let's see here. What can we say about that? Well, education could, particularly if you're nutty enough to want to create your own material, not be tethered to a publisher, that means you have to have a modicum of knowledge in a multitude of areas. So look, a college degree probably comes in handy. An economics degree, probably also in handy. A law degree wouldn't be bad. art background, all kind of helps. But look, we're talking about comic books. So it occurs to me to have a knowledge of the form of comic books and how they work makes sense. So one of the easiest ways to do that is either through self-education or seek higher education. For example, there's the Cooper School where one would learn how to make comic books, or maybe you're a do-it-yourselfer, kind of like me. I got my college degree, used to work in the film business, but decided to do comics on my own. And how I educated myself on comics went a little like this. I was a comic fan, but I actually had to turn a different part of my brain on to kind of understand how do these things work. And I knew I was approaching it as a writer. So what I actually did was take comic books that I really loved and admired. Particularly, I remember Roger Stern's run on Captain America. And I would take the script that he wrote in the finished comic book and actually wrote out exactly what I saw on the panel and the dialogue. And I wrote out the entire script. And I did that to try to get flow, to understand what was going on in the architecture of the story. I did that a lot. And actually, to this day, I love to self-educate. So if I'm embarking on a new story, I might be looking or referencing things, looking at a style. But through a lot of repetition of stuff like that, I began to kind of get the vibe of what it's like to tell a story. So as an independent comics creator, I mainly do this because I really like, the two main things I enjoy about what I do are telling the stories and getting the troops together to do it, and then coming up with wacky, fun, engaging marketing campaigns. So those two things. So obviously in the domain of self-education, simultaneously I put a particular focus on marketing and promoting. And to give you my 30-second crash course on my particular view on marketing and promotion, I think all the best ideas already occurred before probably 1960. And so I actually look at the older material in terms of things like, really what makes marketing go. I think it was all figured out a really long time ago, and now you see all these new shenanigans, but they're really based on solid principles. So even things like paid social marketing, which we totally endorse, I believe the mechanics underneath it were figured out probably by the 60s. So again, self-education. So if you want to be a comics creator, you should know about putting together the comic. That seems sort of obvious, but there's the creative element, and then there's the manufacturing element. And let me let you know, when I made my first comic book on my own, which was Evil Ernie the Resurrection #1, this was in the spring of 1992, I believe, there came a point. Now, we had already promised that this comic book would be in color. And up until that point, I had made black and white comics. And there just came a point where it was about 12 weeks away from when we were supposed to be shipping. And I looked at myself and I go, oh my God, color. I actually had no contacts for colorists or anything like that. So I had to get my act together and find and learn about color. So there was in my case, there was a lot of that wonderful trial and error type learning. And that's happened throughout my career and probably happens to this day. I don't know if it's the most efficient way to learn, but I'll tell you, it's a very memorable way to learn. Because man, when you make a mistake, it's like, ooh, that hurt. So there's the actual art of making a comic book. Again, and then from there, if you decide that your material, you want to have someone else publish it, well, maybe then you put together a pitch book and send it to a potential publisher. But that's not what this panel is about. This panel is about how to thrive on your own as an indie. So unfortunately, you got to do it. So part of educating yourself is actually making the comic. So a comic usually is made up of these skills: a writer, either a penciler, an inker, a colorist, a letterer, a graphic designer to put it all together, people to make trade dress and logos, and then a graphic designer to make it go to the printer, and then a relationship to the printer, and then printing it and getting it out into the world. So you really want to educate yourself on all those elements. The manufacturing of the creative material, the manufacturing of the physical book itself. And I think I can already hear you through the interwebs asking me questions about printers. And we're going to get to that in the Q&A. And then the next important move, probably the most important, is the marketing of your material. Because let's be honest, if you do not market your material, no one's going to know about it. And let me give you a little story and aside about how in the day I used to market my material. So I believe that in my own way, my group has always been a band. And a band starts out by playing the local clubs, and then it moves around, and maybe if people like it, they play bigger and bigger venues, and maybe one day get to arenas. So to do that in a real practical sense, when I launched Evil Ernie, the Resurrection #1, I set up a tour. It was called the Resurrection Tour. And we went all the way from Southern California to all the way about Santa Barbara. And then we flipped over to the East Coast. We tied into a comic book convention in New York, and then went all the way up to like the Boston area. And we did probably 18 stops in 21 days. It was bananas. And imagine, like, when you're starting out, you really are working with people's complete indifference. Like, no one cares. No one's waiting for your thing. People barely show up. And obviously our venues were comic shops. And in the early 90s, there was already a degree of heat on comic books. So it was still hard because we were unknown. However, we would show up at a given spot, and in a venue that comes to my mind was Golden Apple. And for fun, let me show you a flyer from one of my signings from maybe that time. Of all things, it's in our Coffin Comics bathroom. So boing, let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, Jimmy Calabrese, come on in the bathroom. Check this out, there's a couple of them. These are all referring back to that time. So touring, put an Evil Ernie out Friday, December 13th, that was 1991. This was probably 92 or 93. Yeah, you can see him go back to 94. This was a very fun time, still very memorable. But this was a way that we would kind of get the word out and let people know. And, you know, let's say you meet 10 or 20 people. I've never been particularly passive, so like if we were in a comic shop and someone's walking by, I'm like, hey, you, come on over here, let me tell you about this. And look, I realize not everyone's gonna like what it is that I do, and I'm perfectly fine with that, but you know, you gotta give it a chance. So I'm saying rule #1 is educate yourself, and there's probably a never-ending amount. I mean, in short strokes too, I will even say you need to educate yourself on budgets. And if not you, it's gotta be someone in your group. If you're like, even if you're the most artistic person in your group, I think you gotta get a little uncomfortable and confront things like budgets, because that's how all this stuff operates. And look, if you blow your budget too many times, you're out of business. So you kinda gotta deal with it. And maybe that's another sub-tip to all this is, if you're doing something and it feels sort of uncomfortable, it's probably the thing you gotta learn, honestly. Think about it, because, yeah, so that's that. So I'm saying, rule #1 is educate yourself, and I do believe that that is an ongoing process. So, rule #2, provide something that people want. Now, what the heck do I mean about that? And you're gonna notice the nature of this panel is actually a real macro view on things. Like, we'll drill down a little bit on Q&A, but I actually believe that you have to figure out the macro view of what you stand for and what you're providing to people if you're ever gonna have a chance. So, in our case, I like to provide fun and excitement in the domain of rock and roll inspired supernatural comics. Full stop. That's what we do. In fact, so that's what I mean by provide something people want. What do you stand for people? What do people get by reading your material, encountering your company, encountering you at a convention, encountering you online? Who do they get? And when they meet you, what are you giving people in return? So again, our mission is always providing fun and excitement at all costs. And look, I get it. You're on the climb. You got your aches and pains. Sometimes you feel up for it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you feel like bitching, moaning, whining, and complaining. But you know what? I'm gonna let you in on a secret. No one cares, man. No one cares. You know why? Because everyone's got their own. And if what you do is provide bitching, moaning, whining, and complaining, that's common, super common. But people want something else. They want to step in to a fantasy. And why wouldn't they? I like to. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So let's say you and I, we're heading out to Disneyland. We're going to Disneyland, we paid our hard-earned cash, and we're walking in the doors, and there's all those characters that we grew up with. You know, there's Daffy Duck and Mickey Mouse and Minnie. And you know, just as a kid, you think about those, all the joy that those characters provided for you, and then you walk up and you want to get a picture and say, hey, Mickey, I want to get a picture with you. And then Mickey turns around and says, hey, you know what, kid? I'm sorry, I'm not feeling up to it. You know what? I had a crappy day, and I had a crappy life, and I had this and I had that. Now, wouldn't you be let down? That only seems to reason you'd be let down. Jimmy Calabrese, wouldn't you be let down? So, Jimmy Calabrese is our cameraman for the day. So what I'm saying is provide something to people that's exciting. And I actually take this premise real seriously, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So we're going to come to another part of our building. Walking through the building, here's some areas where I'm signing. It's a we're fully in production. But so in the case of Coffin Comics, you'll notice that we actually have a thing called our mission statement. And we even say it. It's like we create fun, happiness, and excitement. And we even have a vision statement, and we do our best to operate inside these values. And what I mean by that is every day we aspire to this. This doesn't mean that we're perfect, we're humans obviously, but at least we're shooting for a target. And so you might think this is crazy, like you signed up for this panel and you're like, well, how the heck do I thrive as an independent? Well, I'm telling you, if you provide something to people that is compelling and exciting, it stands the test of time. So let me give you a couple examples. So there are comic book creators that I consider contemporaries or peers, and they make wildly different content than I do, yet I feel that they do this. So as an example, let's look at Eric Powell, the creator of The Goon. The second you read that comic book and you meet him and his company, they espouse a feeling. It's dark, it's fun, it's kooky, it's so fully realized. And I would say the same thing. Guys like Jeff Smith, of the creator of Bone, you meet Jeff, you read the material, and it's just utterly fully realized. And again, another person I would say, Terry Moore, Strangers in Paradise. You meet Terry, his lovely wife, at a convention, you read their material, and that is a fully realized comic book creator. And you meet a guy like Terry, affable, friendly, not complicated, always ready, that kind of thing. So, and you'll notice that I'm pointing out particularly like truly independent comic creators. These creators for most of their career have not been tethered to publishers, maybe for short periods of time, but like this is their business. And I believe why they've stood the test of time is they've provided something. So Bone as a comic book, it's aspirational. Strangers in Paradise seems to connect with a generation, and Eric Powell's stories are timeless and fun and masterfully crafted. Like in every case, each one of these creators, their craftsmanship is virtually unparalleled. So getting back to that, provide something that people want. I think we all know aspiring comic book creators who have a presence on social that is less than optimum, let's say. And I would assert that in 99% of the time, it really impacts their career. The reason why I chose fun is just long ago, like honestly, it came right up in front of my face that my mission is to provide fun. Because first of all, I have a lovely experience, and then the person opposite of me or that's working with me has that experience. And again, this doesn't mean every moment of the day I'm that way. I actually are fairly hardworking, very intense, highly competitive. And those characteristics aren't always conducive to fun. But if I'm always going after fun, it really helps. So I hope you're hearing what I'm saying in terms of providing something that people want, because I actually believe it's super important. It's not the slickest cover, the coolest art, the best writing. It's providing something out of the ordinary. So that's that piece. Rule number 2, provide something that people want. Rule number 3, the customer is king. Now you'd be very surprised to know that a lot of people do not realize, or creators don't realize, that what they're doing is they're making something ultimately for people to consume, to read, to enjoy, to collect. So who's the boss? The customer is the boss, man. The customer is the boss. I don't even know if I could probably just repeat that for about 5 minutes for you. The customer is the boss. Now look, you got to do what you love. You have your own opinions. You do your best. You do your thing. And the hope is that it connects with people and people want to be part of it. And that really is the agenda in the game. However, if you're an independent comic creator and you have your own independent comic label, like a mom and pop shop like we do, the people that write your ticket for your whole life are the people who read the material and collect the material. Full stop. That's what we always say. I mean, here at Coffin, I guess for me, since in my case, I've been independent style comic creating since the very beginning. And as far back as literally December 1991, I go to a little convention and have a little table and I'm there hawking my wares. And it's very clear to me that if people like what I have and they buy it and they repeat buy it, well, I might have a company. And those are the people who are writing my ticket. So I don't know what else there is to add. Give me 1 second. You follow me for a second. I just want to see if there's any other notes about customer as king, because it's so, that's the whole statement for me that I don't even know like how much to say about it. Because like a customer, you don't make these, you make these things for you, but really it's got, I mean, you don't have a business without a customer. So let me see if I said anything about that. Well, so my, yeah, I mean, I think we could see this in particular, the customer is king, in the domain of crowdfunding. So we've been using crowdfunding as a way to reach a lot of people since February of 2015. And as we record this, it's June 2020, so about 5.5 years. And we're very lucky on our first crowdfunding campaign. I think it was called Lady Death Chaos Rules, and I believe our backers were somewhere around 1,000 backers, which is remarkable. And now Lady Death will be up to about 2,700 backers. It's incredible over time. So we've built that over time. And clearly the feedback that we get from people as we're crowdfunding in particular gives us that immediate feedback to let us know what we're doing, how we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So the customer is king. Your customer is not necessarily, well, let me back up a minute. So by design, we are a direct-to-consumer company. Sorry for the technical term, that's called DTC. We are, because we felt that we weren't necessarily getting support through the conventional known comics market. I don't bring that, I'm not really whining about it, but it wasn't showing up. So in the case of the conventional comics market, the barrier to your end user customer is the comic shop retailer. And the comic shop retailer tends to make purchases based on their enthusiasm. Again, really not a judgment, it's just the way it goes. So a lot of the shop owners grew up on their Marvel, DC, things that they're nostalgic about, G.I. Joe, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so that kind of material, plus some economic advantages the quote-unquote front of the catalog publishers have, make it more ready for comic shop owners to want to move into that direction where they're supporting the stuff I just mentioned. So independents are quote-unquote at an economic disadvantage and a content-driven disadvantage because it's less enticing to the retailer. And the reason I bring that up is in direct-to-consumer, you could reach the person you're after. In the comic market, you actually have to try to reach the retailer, get them enrolled, and then possibly you could enroll the end user. And that's a different panel probably. I think we're going to get a little into it during Q&A. But I'm sort of assuming that you're going direct to the customer, whether you're at conventions, you're using mail order, or you're using crowdfunding. These are great ways to meet the end user, enroll the end user, your potential customers. So yeah, the customer is king. Let's see, anything else to say on the customer is king? And I guess the customer is always end user, but again, you can change the target of who the customer is based on the area that you're selling in. So in the comic shop market, I believe that the customer, I would assert, is the retailer. And then after the retailer, it would be the end customer, because you really have to get the retailer excited. My point is, as an independent, it's a little tougher. Not a judgment, just what it is. The customer is king. I could repeat it all day. Next up, rule number 4, build trust. Build trust. So what do I mean by build trust? So this really comes, to me, there's customer service and superior customer service or high-grade customer service, but even above that is the premise of trust. So I always like to operate where we're building trust with our customers, particularly since we tell serialized fiction in comic book form. So we, Coffin Comics, produce 4 48-page graphic novels a year of brand new content, and it's usually it's a season, it's a chapter, and it's essentially ongoing. So we're looking to build our audience and to accumulate. And building trust has everything to do about your business. So it'll boil down to you being your word. So you being your word with the artists you work with. You've paid them, you've done everything that you said you would do contractually. That's being your word with your manufacturers, your printers, people you owe money to, staying in integrity there. And then also, and then in particular, obviously, your end user, your customer, so that you're building trust. So what I mean by that in a practical sense is if you make a promise, keep that promise. If you can't keep that promise, as soon as humanly possible, be transparent about it and get in communication. So let me give you an example. We've done 21 crowdfunding campaigns, and on our 19th crowdfunding campaign for a character named Hellwitch, we were at the printer and we had promised to deliver the comic this January 2020. And we're at the printer. Now, the book is done, gave it to the printer reviewed all the files, cover files, and now it's actually about to go onto the press and they're about to roll. And they looked at a page in the comic book and they saw a scene of romance, let's say, and someone who worked for them didn't like it and made a complaint. And so that printer called us up and said, hey, tell you what, we found this sex scene in your comic book, and between you, me, and the wall, this wasn't like crazy gratuitous, but it was more inferred. But from their point of view, this printer said, if you change this page, we will print your book. If you don't change this page, we can't print it. So these guys didn't really know us. So I spoke out of turn and I said, look, I politely decline. We're going to take our business elsewhere. So you could imagine by taking our business elsewhere, it set us back. It literally set us back about 6 weeks. We had to find a new printer. We had to go through the whole pre-press element again, which is get the files, have the printer review it, make any changes. So as soon as we secured the next printer and things were back on track, we got in communication and we just told our backers. We said, hey, look, this is what happened. Hopefully you think we did the right thing, but we want to let you know we promised this in January, but realistically now it's going to be in March. Now I got to tell you, to a person, people were totally fine with it. So it wasn't, it was the only time in our history we actually had to make that type of repromise. And that's what I mean about building trust, is sort of being your word very, very consistently in all areas of your business. Sometimes that's not easy, but I think people do want the truth. We also believe, so underneath trust would be running an ethical business. So what we try to do is we use what we call best practices to try to be honest, on board. That way also, like, we don't have to, if you're devious and you're a liar and stuff, it takes so much thought and planning and it's too much time. So look, I'm a little older, wiser, and we just try to play it really straight with people, our business associates, artists that we work with. And that way also, with our trust being relatively high, if we do mess up, we can actually talk reasonably to a person, because it's not like we did it to them 90 times. We could say, it's like, hey, look, authentically, we did mess up, but we're totally willing to, make it right. So that trust goes with the people you do business with, your fellow creators, and your end user. And look, if you're not there in your life right now, really work toward it, because trust building is super important to a company having any form of momentum. Without it, for example, let's say you're a creator and you're new in the game, but you're not in communication with your fellow creators, you're not paying on time, or you're unable to pay and you're not being in communication. That's not fair, and it doesn't build trust. As you could imagine, if it was happening to you, it would be the opposite of building trust. You'd sort of wonder about these people. So try to put yourself in the next guy's shoes or gal's shoes and imagine how that would go. So building trust is absolutely key, absolutely critical. The next rule: work hard, work smart. Hey, look, I'm sorry. Unless you're Kim Kardashian or you're some sort of Instagram person, really for the craftsmanship that you're looking to develop in the world of comic books, there's no way around the hard work. And I've heard that it takes like, I don't know, 10 to 40,000 hours to develop mastery in something. And, it's sad but true. I'm a little older than most, or I'm 58, so I kind of look back and I've put my time in, but there's really no way around that one. I'll always listen to business news and stuff, and everyone's looking for that secret pill. You either win the lottery or this, that, or the other, but there's no way around it. It's hard work is the game. So I am known as one of the more hardworking guys in comics. I'm very, very lucky. I just come from hardworking stock. So in my personal view, I actually view hard work as sacred. I have no shame in my game. There's nothing here in our business that I wouldn't do. I'll clean the floor, I'll mop the floor, I'll take out the garbage, I'll write the comic, whatever, I don't care. It's all part of it. So there's probably no way around the hard work element, because also this industry, comic books, probably there's maybe less than 10 people that are on a superstar status that earn bucket loads of money. It's just not that kind of industry. So generally, you work really, really hard and you're going to have a nice middle class, upper middle class lifestyle, but you got to work your butt off to pull it off and be consistent. So when I say work hard, that's kind of a given, but I also say work smart. So what I mean by work smart is by using a lot of plotting, a lot of planning, a lot of strategies, a lot of systems, you could actually make things simpler on yourself. So if you think about it, when you're making and publishing comic books, there's a lot of repeated actions. Write the script, pencil the pages, ink, color, go to press. So if you can get little flow charts that take care of all that stuff, and for each project you're working on, you could track them. Definitely don't use your brain. The brain is a horrible repository for the memory. Just get it all out on paper. So build systems, but don't be afraid to work hard. Let me see if I had any notes on my work hard part. Well, in my notes I say there's no way around hard work, but I would also say that at Coffin Comics, we look at three things. We look at people, process, and products. So the people are the people that we are involved with. So that'll be our staff. That'll be the vendors we work with, like printers. It'll be the creative people we work with. So the people. And we're looking for high-grade people. We want people generally who are positive, hardworking, and they're within reason. They are their word. We don't tend to work with people who are not that because it just slows the company down. The next thing is process. So we're systems-based, systems-orientated. And in my case, that's probably because my background was actually working in film production. And I was what's known as an assistant director. And that's a guy who actually manages movie sets for the director. And it's been pointed out to me on numerous times that probably everything I needed to learn as a career professional, I learned making movies. It is true. I mean, as a small example, I think I was 24 or 25 years old, and I'd worked on a lot of movies shooting in New York in the mid to late 80s, like Batteries Not Included, Bright Lights, Big City. So I got hundreds of days on working on film sets and learning that process with craftspeople. And I started out as what's called a production assistant. And there is a type of production assistant who, when they begin, they go get coffee for people, and I did all that. But then there's a type of production assistant who's actually learning a craft, moving toward becoming an assistant director. Well, I was lucky enough to be hired to be second assistant director on a movie called Tougher Than Leather starring Run DMC. And after the first day, the first assistant director quit. The guy had a nervous breakdown. And by proxy, I became the first assistant director. I'm 24, 25 years old. Second day, like a 20-day shoot. Rick Rubin was the director. Our talent were Run DMC, which was Joe, Jay, and Daryl. We had the Beastie Boys, Orange Juice Jones, Slick Rick. It was amazing, incredible, but imagine, all the elements that have to be put together in concert to get something like that done. So I really learned to work smart really, really, really quickly. And I guess one other film story I would like to share with you in the whole work smart domain was the following. I worked on the movie Bright Lights, Big City, starring Michael J. Fox, and I was hired as the key production assistant. And so that was ultimately going to be a 6-week shoot. We actually had a director who got fired, actually. They replaced her with another director, and we shot for another 6 weeks. But the reason I bring this up is I was in charge of the walkie-talkies for the entire unit. We're shooting in New York City. We're moving like 6 to 8 trucks around the city. We got to do it fast, like 90 minutes. Yet I was the kid who was in charge of the walkie-talkies. And I was taught nothing about it. But this is what I was told. They always got to be charged. If they're broken, they got to be fixed. And if any of those things are not perfect, you're fired. So the film was shot in New York City. I lived in Hoboken, New Jersey. And so I figured out a plan. I had all the chargers with me. I had all the walkie-talkies, and I had literally a giant, like 80-pound, I'm losing the word for it, but it's a giant pack. And I brought it every morning, brought it home every night. I figured out my system because it was up to me. That was my job. Now, ultimately, and thankfully, I think if I remember correctly, the costume truck allowed me to plug in, so I cut a deal. They would park the trucks at night at the Teamster warehouse, and I could plug in. But in the beginning, it was just up to me. Someone saw me after a while and took pity. But I think that goes under work smart, which is establishing that there is a problem and providing a solution to the problem. So work hard, work smart. Rule number 5. Rule number 6, be methodical, be responsible, be consistent. So I've been told by many friends that I am methodical, probably to the point that I'm a robot, and I may or may not have as developed a personal life as I could because I'm like nose to the grindstone. I get friends calling, it's like, dude, you should really just get out every once in a while. But given the circumstance, I guess just being methodical is fine. Here we are at mid-June 2020. So being methodical, there's a lot of repeated actions that occur when one is producing comic books, and I believe that people really need to be comfortable with that, and we'll talk about that. But there's a lot of refining of the same thing every time. So, for example, I'm the art director of our company, and I generate covers by a myriad of wonderful artists, like a who's who. And it's really up to me to solicit their greatness, but also to work with them. And I got to kind of be the repository of every cover we've ever done, so I don't get repeated imagery and things like that. So being methodical kind of helps, and that would help anyone. Next up, it's be responsible. So this is the one you don't want to hear, but I'm letting you know. The success or failure of your company is up to you. It's your fault. If it goes great, you get a little glory. If it goes bad, it's up to you. And I believe that's a real important way to view things, that you are ultimately accountable. Like if it succeeds or fails, it's purely up to you. Because if you take a different tack where it's like, well, this circumstance led to this not happening, that circumstance, or this person didn't do that, or that person didn't do that, it's very hard to learn from that. So let me give you an example. An artist flakes out on you. Oh, it's their fault. Maybe it wasn't their fault. Maybe you didn't see the signs. Maybe you don't know how to hire people. You've got to learn to hire. So I think that by taking that premise that you're ultimately responsible will force you on a daily basis to take a look at your personal responsibility in all the matters. Now, do I say that's reality? No, but I think it's a very, very empowering way to view things, because if you take on ultimate accountability, you will always refine, refine, refine. See if I had anything to say about that. Yeah, I mean, what I said is like, be responsible, and it says you are to blame. And it's true if you think about it. Do I have any examples of that? I mean, I have a multitude of examples. Probably like the shining example is that my first company that I founded, Chaos Comics, ultimately had a business bankruptcy in August of 2002. And at the time, it was sort of public and online, and it was miserable. And initially, in the failure of the company, I really didn't want to take responsibility. I did admittedly blame some factors. But in retrospect, looking back, I could see that I wasn't financially very sophisticated. I made a lot of strategic mistakes and financial mistakes. I overspent in certain areas. I accrued too much debt. And that really led me to do a lot of things that would be kind of not like what I'm telling you here. You know, for example, we did owe people money, and we did our best to get it to them, and sometimes we did, and a lot of times we didn't. It was horrible. so I wasn't taking ultimate responsibility. And now, a little older, wiser, if I stand from the point of view that I am ultimately responsible for everything, really kind of helps me check the lay of the land. Like, I really hold Coffin Comics as I'm responsible. And what I mean by that too is I'm responsible for all the people who work for Coffin Comics, whether that be our staff in-house, by extension, our our artistic talent, and all the vendors. I believe that they count on me as I count on them, and so I'm going to be responsible for things. And again, I apologize. You might have started watching this panel thinking like you're going to get all the tips and traps, and you are. Here's the thing, you really are. This is the ugly truth you got to hear. So be responsible. And then number 3, be consistent. You know, don't be that guy who drops out of communication or gal. Don't be high one day and low in the other. Like, people are always looking at other people for signals, you know, like what's going on with you? So consistency is really key. Don't drop in and out of communication. Don't use excuses like I had to do this, I had to do that. People are, again, if you want to thrive as an independent, you know, people are really looking to you to be very, very consistent. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm going to give you an atrocious example, but it's absolutely true. My dad passed away when I was 34, and I was right in the middle of publishing Coffin Comics. But the truth of the matter is, 2 days after my father passed, a script was due. It was for a comic I was doing at the time called Lynch Mob. And you know what? I got that script done. So 2 days after my father, who I adored, passed, I got the script done. And the reason I did that is people were counting on me. And I was able to, for sure, spend time mourning my dad. However, I put it inside the context of people are counting on me and I got to get things done. I got to be consistent for other people, particularly if I expect consistency from them. So, the hard truth.
We are at 42 minutes right now, Mr. Pulido.
Okay, so we're going to check me out, man. 42 minutes. So, rule number 7, have fun, man. Like, we're not trying, we get so little time in this world. So try to have a good time while you do it. I know, like, there's a serious tone to some of the things that we've been discussing. Be responsible, be consistent. But I believe that's the platform that really allows you to stand on to do the thing that you ultimately want to do. Like, if you can be consistent, methodical, that kind of stuff, it gives you the platform from which to really provide fun to people. So I think no matter what you're doing, have fun, man. I remember in the early days, me, Stephen Hughes, Mark Morales, Jason Jensen, blow into a convention. We'd get done with the convention at 7 o'clock at night. We'd go eat, and then we'd go back to the hotel and we'd talk like fools till like 6 o'clock in the morning, get 1 hour sleep, get up and do it all over again. So definitely stop and smell the roses and have a good time. So have fun. And then rule number 8, that's repeat. Rules number 1 through 7, because that's all you got to do. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Yeah, and on that note, I said one would have to definitely be comfortable with repetition. It's actually one of the questions we have sometimes. We have folks working in the warehouse because, for example, like bagging and boarding a comic book, not easy, right? It just takes a lot of time. So, it could be monotonous if you view it as monotonous. So you got to be comfortable. I know I still to this day write the product listings, the product descriptions for our company. I've been writing product descriptions since 1991. So I got to have peace with it. Probably the only thing I don't have peace with is writing press releases. I don't like them. But you know, largely it's sort of like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really have an opinion about doing dishes. I kind of like it. So like, you know, I don't have an opinion or taking out the garbage. It's just what I do. So I don't have a big opinion about it. Like, oh my God. So, I think repetition is part of what we do. So now, what I'd love to do is to get into the question and answer period. So what I'm going to do is reach out into the internet, and I'm going to pick somebody out here. You in Australia, what is your question? Your question is, where do I get printers for comic books? Hey, look, easy. There's a thing called Google. It'll get you anything. So what I would do is I would Google comic book printers or digital comic book printers, and then I would see the reviews on those particular printers and see how it goes. There's 2 types of printing. There's offset-based printing, and that's for higher print runs. And then since 2005 has been the miracle of digital comic book printing, where you could actually print one of something. Absolutely amazing. Coffin Comics uses Artist Express for digital comic book printing needs. We use a multitude of printers for all different things, hardcovers, trades, comic books that go to the comic book market. Super easy. Google is your friend. Next question. The question is from Idaho. The question is, what are some of the more common mistakes when making a crowdfunding, like a Kickstarter, Indiegogo? Well, the first mistake that we ever made on our first Kickstarter, and we had done a lot of research, and we launched our Kickstarter, and we didn't really realize that in either of those crowdfunding areas, a backer can technically only back one reward tier or one perk at a time. And that was a mind blower. There is a workaround for that, and it's called add-ons or over-pledging, and that's a different conversation for a different time. But that's the one that really messed us up. Another crowdfunding question I get a lot is, should you have your project mostly ready, or should you get your funding and then spend the next year making your project? Well, it kind of depends on what your agenda is. I talked to my friend Jimmy Palmiotti, who I consider the mayor of comics, and I asked him the same question before I got into this crowdfunding game. And he said, you're going to create better momentum if by the time you go to Kickstarter, your project is ready to print. And so I took that as the gospel, and that's what I've repeated 21 times. So I believe that you should be very, very close to ready or close to print so that you could deliver within 8 to 12 weeks of your close, which is what we do. We deliver in the 8th or 9th week after close almost every time. The reason I say you do that, and then we repeat, since we do like 4 to 5 crowdfunding projects a year, and it does create momentum, and if we are our word, it creates trust. So I know that we only have a couple of minutes here, so another question, New Jersey. So the question is, how do I get into Diamond comic distribution? If you want to do that, the great news is you could just contact Diamond, and they're actually going to send you a whole kit, what you would fill out. And when I got back into the publishing game in 2015 and decided to try to get back into the Diamond catalog, I had to go through it like everybody else. So I filled out a bunch of forms and I submitted my material. Now, I like completed issues they wanted to see. And one of the things that Diamond is looking to do is to look at a given product that you're offering and see if it will hit a certain purchase order threshold. And I believe it's about $2,500. So I know that we're getting close on time. So what I would like to say in conclusion is good luck. I think comic books have been really good to me. I've had my ups and my downs, and I'm sure you will too. Life is short, but it's just, damn, it sure can be fun, man. So in conclusion, if you would like to thrive as an indie comic creator now, do the steps that I just told you to do. You've been great. I've been Brian Pulido. Holler at you later.